When they get HP with it.
We are doing this special today. And then, okay. Okay, thank you for all coming here. As we, before we introduce our speaker, Tara is going to talk about a very important meeting he was in last week, and then he has to run out to the meeting, but we thought Tara should give us some questions.
So I just wanted, Carl asked me to give a quick update. Friday, I was in Washington. They held a summit. About 175 people were invited at the White House, which actually means in the Eisenhower Executive Building. They're calling it the White House Summit. More excited. And the meeting was to essentially to discuss innovation in the nuclear energy area and to emphasize that the administration supports nuclear energy as one element of its all of the above strategy to develop clean energy sources. So the workshop or the summit ran from 1 p.m. until 5 p.m. had 3 panel sessions. The first panel session was on climate change and the important role that nuclear energy can play. The second was on the current status of U.S. leadership and competition, and the final one was on innovation, and in particular emphasis on startup companies that are looking at building or developing new designs for nuclear reactors. It provided an opportunity for the administration and the Department of Energy to announce some new initiatives that they're going to launch to encourage and support and facilitate startup companies and entrepreneurs to develop new reactor designs, which of course is, I think from our perspective, kind of neat, since about half of our graduates seem to be going off to work for startup companies instead of the traditional career paths off to the national labs and things like that. So the announcement was that they're going to have a new program called Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. It will be centered at Idaho National Lab, but will be connected to all the other labs. It will have a number of different, so it's GAIN is the acronym. I love acronyms. Basically, the first thing is that the GAIN will provide access to capabilities within the federal government. And this is similar to what NASA has done for companies that want to develop rockets for commercial space launches, to make their facilities available for things that would be very expensive for a startup company to try to do by itself. And so there'll be a clearinghouse for that sort of activity. They will develop a nuclear energy infrastructure database so that you can find out what resources are available if you want to get problems solved. They will have a funding opportunity announcement issued for what they call small business vouchers, which will be grants of $2 million that a small business or startup companies can apply for. And that $2 million can be taken to any national lab and have work done at the national lab using the national lab's infrastructure to solve a problem that is considered important by the startup company. They'll also set up a program to help startup companies navigate the regulatory process and to understand what they need to do in order to interact correctly with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They're announced that they'll be holding another workshop on advanced non-light water reactors. That's going to be in January. They're going to increase substantially the total amount of loan guarantee money that's available for building new nuclear power infrastructure or upgrading existing plants. They're going to establish a light water reactor research working group. The CASL, Computing Advanced Simulations, I can't remember the name of the acronym, but this is the really big computing initiative, has now pretty much worked through the problem of developing models for conventional existing large light water reactors like the Westinghouse reactors. So they're going to be shifting their focus to develop and demonstrate high fidelity modeling for the NuScale reactor design to support the SMR. And of course, NuScale is a startup company, is derived out of a startup company. The incumbents, the B&W, the incumbents just are not nimble. And so, as everybody knows, mPower has crashed and burned, and the startup effort out of NuScale has actually been successful. And it shows that I think that small organizations, startup companies can make better strategic decisions about key things early on in the development process than the incumbents can. And then finally, there's going to be an initiative to develop modernized light water reactor control room technology that's going to be focused that's going to be demonstrated at the Palo Verde's plant. And this should be helpful to anybody who wants to develop new reactors, because of course control rooms are a major element. So this is actually, it was a really pretty cool meeting. That's what we.
So, Perry, I know you have to run to the telecom, but this, when I read the link that you provided, this stunned me, because this seemed to have been an extraordinary departure from what seemed to have been benign neglect from the administration for 10 years. What changed?
Well, the first thing is that the main reason that there's a whole bunch of people populating the startup companies is because DOE has been very generous to nuclear engineering departments with research funding. I think that if you look back through the history of the administration, the fact that the president and the White House did not react like Germany did during the midst of the Fukushima accident speaks a lot to having a fundamental base of support. This I think, the interesting thing here is that you may remember that the administration early on moved to cancel for NASA the Constellation project, which if you don't know, Constellation was the big government in NASA conventional procurement effort to develop the replacement for the space shuttle, and it never was successful at all. They spent billions of dollars. And so I think that the administration thinks that startup companies like SpaceX have much better probability of really fixing nuclear energy technology in ways that will make it perform better and be more affordable. And they're essentially betting on that by going in the direction of facilitating startup companies to be the prime idea generators for new reactor technology. We'll see how that goes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I apologize.
We should have you for a longer talk, but that was a great start. John, would you like to introduce our speaker today? We have plenty of seats here.
Hi everyone, if you don't know me, I'm John Reed. I'm a graduate student here, one of the older ones now. But we have Eric Abel here today from Varian Medical Systems, and Varian is actually based here in the Bay Area. I met Eric about 3 years ago when we were able to get a group of about 10 or 12 grad students over to Varian to get a tour, because I am interested, and there are lots of us interested in radiation therapy, radiation oncology, et cetera, medical physics. And they're right in our backyard. It was pretty amazing to see, actually, the thing I remember was that Varian's manufacturing plant is there in Palo Alto. I just thought that was the most ridiculous thing to put such expensive real estate to have a manufacturing plant. But the deal is, the way the story goes, is maybe 50 or 60 years ago, they signed a lease with Stanford and locked in their rate. So it's very affordable. And they signed a 100-year lease. So that's how they can afford to have this, manufacturing. You expect some manufacturing being so cheap, out in the desert or the Midwest or somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but it's prime real estate. It's really amazing. Eric, his bio is listed. He did bachelor's in physics and went in, spent a couple years in Germany, did a master's at the Max Planck Institute, and then ended up going to MIT and got his PhD in physics. So he did some experimental physics background, and then found his way through a couple companies, and now is a senior research scientist at Varian. And I believe you're on the proton therapy, in the proton therapy world, I would say. So I don't know, excited to have a talk here about generally what's going on in radiation therapy and radiation cancer and what Varian's up to. So, Eric, take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, John, and thanks for having me to talk to you guys today. So I just wanted to Putting this talk together, again, my background is I'm a PhD physicist. I studied superconductors to get my PhD. That relates directly to cancer therapy, yes. Actually, ironically, it does indirectly, but that's another topic. So, John asked me to come speak and to a panel of, I guess you guys are nuclear engineering, nuclear physicists, students, and I was a nuclear physicist, but I thought, what would interest me, and really, what was amazing to me when I discovered this job at Varian was actually how rich the field of really basic physics there really is in industry. I mean, so because I was always it was always driven into my head. Well, if you want to do anything interesting, you got to go to academia. You got to go to academia. Well, I found that in medical physics and in medicine in general, there's actually a really rich playground for basic physics, applied physics, and I just wanted to share a little bit about this world to maybe get a little bit excited about some of the physics that's going on in our fight against cancer here. So, but to start with, this, I'm sure I don't know how familiar you guys are with the cancer epidemic, but I mean it is a big factor. You can see right there it shares, with heart disease. Heart disease is one of the top killers in the United States. And on top of that, it is a significant financial burden. I mean, according to the Center for Disease Control, our cancer care expenditures were about $125 billion in 2010, and they project that to be about $156 billion in 2020. So it is a significant problem. It's something that we would really like to get under control. So the cancer treatment options, surgery is one of the most common, and it's actually and it's pretty straightforward. They go and they cut the tumor out and try to take care of the cancer that way. Chemotherapy, we've all heard of that, essentially the injection of lethal chemicals by the preparation of tumor cells. Radiation therapy, that is the targeting of cancer with high energy radiation. And then there's targeted therapy, which is basically similar to chemotherapy, but rather than a systemic killing of all cells, it basically is targeted at trying to really kill specific types of tumor cells, and that's sort of an emerging field, as is immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is the attempt to try to get the immune system to actually kill the cancer cells, and that's an exciting field with a lot of new developments, and I'll have one slide on that later on. And then there's a whole other wealth of therapies that I'm not going to discuss here, but I mean it's very creative. Like one of them is hyperthermia. You use elevated temperature to kill tumor cells. There's focused ultrasound using sound waves to kill tumors. There's a lot of different creative ways, and none of them have really taken off, but it's very active research. But really, the big three, if you get a cancer diagnosis and you go in to talk to your doctor, I mean, this is really the therapy trifecta: surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy. So I just want to talk a little bit about these in a little bit more detail. So surgery, as I mentioned before, and so these are all facts from the American Cancer Society. I'm not really an expert in any of these, but so surgery can be used to diagnose or prevent cancer in some cases. Most people that are diagnosed will have some form of surgery, and oftentimes it offers the greatest chance for a cure, as long as the cancer is not becoming metastatic or spread to the rest of the body. However, along with surgery, you have the usual sort of surgery side effects. And a lot of times, most cancer patients are elderly. They can't deal with the surgery side effects as well. So these are a big deal in considering cancer care. However, obviously surgical techniques are advancing, they're becoming less and less invasive, and so some of these side effects are being, to a large part, mitigated, but are nonetheless still there. Chemotherapy, as I said, is a systemic use of medicine or drugs to kill cancer. It actually kills all cells, but normal cell, they do a fractionated treatment, so in between treatments, the normal cells recover, the cancer cells die, and that's sort of the idea behind chemotherapy. However, I mean, there's a whole list of side effects, and a lot of us are familiar with the hair loss and the sort of the sickness, the immunal, the compromising of the immune system. I know my uncle just had that. He had cancer, and they gave him chemotherapy, and then he contracted a disease, and it was a disease that ultimately killed him because he had an immune system. So that is sort of a major side effect. So radiation therapy, again, this is according to the American Cancer Society. I mean, again, it's the use of ionizing radiation to basically kill tumor cells, and I'll talk about how a little later on. But if you look at the list of side effects, I mean, really the main side effects are skin problems like dryness, blistering, peeling, where the radiation enters the body, and then obviously along with any sort of treatment, there's fatigue. And there's a risk of secondary cancer induced by the radiation. And then every site, depending on where you're treating, is going to have their own side effects. And I didn't want to go into those, but I mean, they're there, and there's various degrees of severity depending on where it's being treated. So, really, I mean, radiation therapy comparatively has relatively few side effects, and is therefore associated with better quality of life post-treatment, especially for these elderly people, which can't, again, have a hard time dealing with the side effects of surgery or chemo and so forth. So, some facts from the American Association of Radiation Oncology. So, nearly 2/3 of all cancer patients receive radiation therapy during their illness. There are types of cancer which are more conducive to radiation therapy. Namely, here I highlighted breast cancer, prostate, and lung make up more than half of the patients receiving radiation therapy. And for most types of radiation therapy, 75% of the patients are treated with the intent to cure the cancer rather than just control or relieve the symptoms. And that's important because I think historically radiation was viewed as sort of a quality of life improvement, sort of ways to keep the tumor under control. But I mean, lately their technological advances have made it so that we're really targeting to cure disease with marginal, with reasonable success rates. So now Varian Medical Systems. Just a little bit about us. We are a radiation oncology company. 6,300 employees worldwide. About $2.8 billion in sales. We also have a software business around radiation oncology, and we have roughly 7,000 installed base of roughly 7,000 medical linear accelerators, and we also have an X-ray tubes business, diagnostic X-ray tubes. We OEM for companies like GE and Siemens, as well as our own equipment, Philips. So our corporate slogan right now currently is the world without fear of cancer. This is the message we tell our customers, and this is what we tell ourselves, and we are dedicated to that. Here's a list of all of our array of products. You can see various degrees of types of radiation oncology systems, both an external beam up here, like a beam coming from the outside, treating within, and then there's also braking therapy, which is you insert a small radioactive source inside the tumor and treat from the inside out. And then we also have all of the software eclipses and treatment planning, which basically models where the dose is going to go and try to optimize the dose. Yes?
So are some of these image guided? So I think, is the TrueBeam, is that an X-ray source and detector there?
Yeah, so that would be X-ray source and detector, and that's the treatment beam. So that's imaging beam and treatment beam. So basically, all of our products except for the unique have that imaging.
And it's just X-ray?
That's X-ray, correct. Yeah. So, and then of course the software for both treatment planning and also medical patient records. We have solutions for that as well. So interestingly, this is one of our marketing slides, but 1 in 7 people in the United States, statistically 1 in 7 people will be treated on the Varian system. So they tell us this, we remind us that we do make a difference. You know, when you think about it, that's a significant portion of this room that will probably be sitting on one of our systems. And it makes it easy to go to work every day thinking about that. So moving, changing the pace a little bit, I want to go into a little bit about why radiation therapy works. So, I mean, really, I'm not a biologist, so I do work with biologists, and so I borrowed some of their slides. But what happens really is at the DNA level. So at the top, you've got sort of the normal DNA strand, two-dimensional representation. So you can have breaks in the strand, and so these break in a single strand, not really a big deal. We have repair mechanisms to take care of that. So, and then you can also have 2 breaks in the strand, but if they're away from the same base pair, then it's also not really a big deal. It's kind of repaired as independent breaks. What's really bad is when you have a double strand break at the same or few base pairs, and those are the kind that are difficult to repair or cannot be repaired and lead to cancer or cell death. So this is an interesting statistic because I never appreciated this, but we actually are adapted, evolved to deal with DNA breaks, and these are just some statistics. Just at regular body temperature, 10,000 DNA single-strand breaks per day, 5,000 DNA base damages per day, 2 DNA double-strand breaks per day. And so you think about this, you wonder why we're not just walking out with cancer all the time, right? The truth is that we have mechanisms to fix these, and it's when these break down that cancer occurs. So what radiation does is it increases some of these double-strand breaks and also this occurrence of what they call locally multiply damaged sites. So when you have any one of these damages that are gathered around in a local region of the chromosome, that is also can be bad for cell survival. So and so radiation, the way that radiation really works is that there's a differential response of normal and cancer cells to radiation because of the fact that really that when it becomes neutral is when the cell is dividing and cancer cells are dividing more quickly. So if you so radiation preferentially kills cancer cells. And what I'm showing here is the sort of a tumor cell death rate as a function of radiation dose. And I mean this is sort of a hypothetical curve, a model, if you will. And you can see if you give normal cells and tumor cells, say 50 gray, this the difference in cell survival is your therapeutic window. And so what we've really worked to doing in the name of the game in radiation therapy is increasing the therapeutic window. So what we do is we try to reduce the dose to healthy tissue, so pushing down this side of the curve, and increase the dose to this tumor cell. So really maximizing that therapeutic window. Just sort of a brief evolution of radiation oncology. So some of the earliest experiments were done in the 30s with kilovoltage X-ray tubes, and you sort of see this is just the dose, relative dose, and it's overlaid on a CT, which they obviously didn't have back then. And then the invention of the Linac came in the 1960s, but I mean targeting was still done using radiographs of the bony anatomy and sort of targeting relative to that bony anatomy. And then real progress came in the 90s when you started having image-guided radiation therapy with CT images and computed treatment plans. So that's CT is computer tomography, right? So this is just 2 fields, but more precisely targeting because of the CT image. And then in this millennium, that gave us the birth of the IMRT, intensity modulated radiation therapy, which is basically coming in with multiple fields from different angles and changing the intensity of that so that you get better better dose conformality around the tumor. So you can see the progression as we go through time. The dose conforms to the tumor better and better. And then at the end here, you can see a deviation from X-rays into particle therapy. So you have protons on the bottom here, and you see very high dose conformality. And then I have carbons up here on the top. That's also sort of the latest. So carbon, what they call particle therapy, is sort of the latest and greatest in radiation therapy. However, as a commercial entity, carbon is not commercially viable, so we're really going to focus on, I'm going to focus on protons a little bit for this talk. And I want to point out, I think this is an appropriate audience for this because the very first proton treatment was actually done here at Berkeley Radiation Laboratory in 1954. So why protons? Well, I think this very simple Monte Carlo simulation I did kind of illustrates it. So I'm comparing 6 MeV X-rays with just 10 particles with 6 250 MeV protons, and you can see that the X-rays, they come through, they pass through, they scatter, and you can see there's dose everywhere, which is, as you can see from those treatment plans. Whereas the protons, they come in to a certain depth and then they stop. So there's no dose beyond this point, and that's and in addition, I mean, there's very little scatter. The protons are forward directed; they scatter a little bit laterally there, but for the most part, they're confined laterally. And yeah, like I said, they stop at a finite depth, so there's no exit dose. However, there are high energy secondary particles, nuclear reactions. I don't need to tell this crowd that there's neutrons kicked out by the protons at that high of energy. We're talking about 250 MeV protons. So with gamma rays, this is much less of an issue. But really, these benefits are what has guided the excitement behind this treatment modality. So as you know, may or may not know, protons primarily lose their energy in matter through Coulomb interactions with the outer electron shells, and it's basically a linear, well approximated by a linear slowing down to a stop, and as such, the proton path is mostly straight, and the range of the secondary electrons is less than linear, which means the dose is more or less absorbed locally. This is a little illustration I have to show a proton going in, and this is the dose deposition as it slows down and gets towards zero velocity. You've got a huge spike in the dose deposition with a very low entrance dose. So what does this mean for, and then if you compare this to, say, the dose deposition for photons, you see that, again, protons have low entrance dose, very sharp Bragg peak at close to the stopping point, and then zero dose beyond. Whereas photons have a very shallow peak, and then just decay exponentially all the way through the patient. So what does this look like on a patient? Well, you can see this is a sort of simulated dose distribution from an X-ray source and then from a proton source. And the important thing to note here is, like, especially in this, there's no dose to the eye here, whereas there's a significant amount of radiation dose to the eye in that treatment plan. So depending on the clinical significance, that may or may not matter. I think in the case of the eye, it does. Again, I'm not a clinician, so again, I mean, this, I told you, like, the latest and greatest of the last couple of decades for X-rays was IMRT, and I'm just comparing a 3-field proton dose delivery to this IMRT delivery using fairly comparable dose conformality in the high dose region, but I mean, there's no dose over here from the protons, whereas on the IMRT, you're dosing the patient in one of these fields. So that's, and then again, there's another example of a pediatric case. So this is they're treating the spine here, and the protons stop in the spine, so you don't have any dose to beyond that. whereas in the photon plan, you've got dose to the entire abdomen here. And this is just showing a difference image of the two. So in pediatric, obviously, young dose to healthy tissue matters much more than, say, a 70-year-old patient. So this sort of dose of healthy tissue sparing is critical. And that's why you'll see proton centers next to pediatric hospitals oftentimes. And then again, another place where it really matters is in the head. So here's proton distribution in the head and corresponding photon distribution. Again, comparable, high dose conformality, but all of this brain is receiving radiation dose in this photon plan for single proton. Yeah.
How is the peak decided where it stops, the polarity?
So that's the beta block equation determines it. So it depends on the density of the material, the effect of the charge, the mean excitation energy, and it depends on the initial proton energy. So
what do you control
that's a nice segue into here we go, the next section. So basically, what I want to illustrate here is, I've shown you this Bragg peak, and it's very sharp and has a fall off of 0. But tumors are usually spread out in space, so that wouldn't work so well. So we need to figure out single Bragg peak will not conform to the tumor. So how do we deal with that? How is that done? So really what needs to be done is this proton. This peak needs to be shaped to the tumor in all 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how that's done. So first, this is the historic way. So the hard one, I call it the hard one because it's maybe less intuitive and it goes right to your question, is how do we do it along the beam direction? Well, it turns out, like I said, the depth in the patient depends on the initial beam energy. So you can see that here's a 231 MeV peak versus a 69 MeV peak. So how do we use that? Well, if you are clever enough and put together a whole bunch of these Bragg peaks, the sum dose has this plateaued shape, which we call a spread out Bragg peak. And if your tumor is shaped like this, then you can make your spread out Bragg peak so that it conforms to that shape along this direction. And again, just to open an overlay of the X-ray, you can see that the X-ray just kind of passes through all the normal tissue and through the tumor, so it's not an issue there. But again, just to kind of illustrate, there's less dose on the entrance here and 0 dose on the exit. So now on so the question is now how do we conform? I've told you how to conform on the along the proton beam. What about orthogonal to the proton beam? Well, there's the very first proton treatment systems use what's called passive scattering. In that case, so you modulate the Bragg peak with this range modulator, which is essentially a spinning wheel, which pulls the Bragg peak in and out. So that gets you your spread out Bragg peak, and then they put in an aperture, which is machined out to the shape of the tumor. So every patient has a unique aperture. And then there's a final, what they call a range compensator, which again is a piece of plastic which has been machined to get the fine 3D shape of the tumor. So these two items are patient specific and need to be machined for every new patient. Again, this is just kind of going into more detail about that. About the range modulator wheel and spinning around. So this is the modulator Bragg peak created by that. And then this is just a little bit more detail on how the collimator and compensator work. And then this is putting everything together, and this is what a passive scattering beam treatment also looks like on the inside. So at Varian, we don't do this. We do something else. It's a newer development in proton therapy called pencil beam scanning. So it basically, it takes advantage of the intrinsically small proton beam size in all the directions. And what pencil beam scanning does is it basically fills in the tumor by varying the beam position and depth, and basically paints the tumor in. So I think this should show a little bit better what's going on. So you can see on the right hand side, this pencil beam is layer by layer, so that the depth is selected with the Bragg peak, right? So that this depth here corresponds to that layer. You can see that layer moving through. And then once it's in the layer, it scans back and forth according to pre-calculated positions and paints in the tumor. So it's like a 3D printer, if you will.
How realistic thing is
So-
this effectively like solid state?
I mean, typical treatment lasts roughly 1 to 2 minutes, and that includes like layer switching time. I mean, the beam delivery is actually quite fast. The dwell time on a single spot is only like 15 milliseconds. Yeah.
Where's the tumor shape coming from?
So that comes from CT. Yeah. So they do. So the workflow is you get diagnosed with cancer. They decide you need. Then you go to get a planning CT, which from that CT they'll then basically delineate the tumor on the CT scan.
By hand?
There's it's semi-automatic. Yeah. So there's some computer aided tools to help them know where the tumor is. But yes, more or less by hand. The auto contouring thing doesn't quite work yet. It's been a hot topic for decades now. But yeah, so that's the job of the radiation oncologist is to contour the tumor and say I want so much dose in this part of the tumor, and then they send it out to the radiologist, who figures out what needs to be done where for the machine, and then that goes out to the physicist who then QAs the time to make sure that the machine can deliver that and it will deliver that, and then does all the measurements to verify that. So again, that's yeah.
How many sessions do you do?
Well, typically, so that depends on the treatment, but on average, I think it's something like 30 fractions for typical either proton or radiation therapy. So
Once a day or
I don't
spread
know.
on a length of time, right?
Yeah, it's spread out over months. Yeah. So I don't know if it's every day or every other day or every.
Can you
3 days.
just do surgery, and if you have the organ, you just open the body and you avoid passing the energy through the entire body.
That's correct. Yeah.
Can you do that? Just
Some parts is a problem, like brain, right? You can't-
okay, yeah, for the brain it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, they do it. I mean, they remove tumors in the brain, and I mean, so that's the big thing, right? And that's part of the total oncology. And when they get patients, there's a board of oncologists that figure out how they're going to treat. So typically what happens is there's surgery followed by radiation therapy, because surgery, you don't always know if you got all the tumors. So if you follow with the radiation therapy, then you can kind of be sure that you got everything. But like you said, there's some things that are difficult for surgery, like the lobectomy can be very hard, especially in elderly patients. Brain is sort of problematic. It really just depends on the site. So yeah.
There's no intraoperative proton therapy just because of imaging issues. There's no intraoperative proton therapy because of imaging issues. It's always like you image first and then you go.
Yes, yeah. You mean like sort of adaptive? Yeah, adaptive therapy, even with photons, is still very much a research topic. So just because of the time span between CT and treatment, these are all. I mean, so yeah, these are all like very relevant topics in radiation oncology. And so, but yeah, adaptive therapy is obviously the gold standard. But one of the things that happens to be that onboard imager would need to create diagnostic quality CT images, and you're just not there yet. So anyway, just kind of comparing the passive scattered protons with IMPT. So the IMPT stands for intensity modulated proton therapy. You can imagine if you're painting the dose at every layer, you can control how much time you dwell on each spot and deliver more dose or less dose depending on what the radiation oncologist describes. And so that's what we call intensity modulated proton therapy. That is sort of the state of the art in proton therapy today. And just kind of comparing dose distribution for passive and IMPT to see, especially this high dose region. There's a lot of healthy tissue being dosed here compared to the one right. So, and then just comparing some IMPT and IMRT. I mean, this is very typical of IMRT. I mean, again, you get high dose conformality on the tumor by spreading out the entrance and exit dose throughout the entire body. So the whole premise here is that the low dose bath that this whole part of the body sees is sort of inconsequential. And I think, the clinical trials are the community sort of accepts that but the clinical trials are still underway to prove that out. But so far, seems to be no higher occurrence of toxicities doing this low dose bath. But still, clearly 0 dose is better than some dose. And all right, so in summary for this section, so there's 2 basic technologies for proton delivery today: passive scattering, pencil beam scattering. There's still a very large number of passive scattering systems out there, and there's some people that there are some arguments for continuing to use passive scattering, but the pencil beam scattering really is becoming the modality of choice. I didn't talk about everybody. There's fewer neutrons because anytime you put something in a proton beam, it's going to create neutrons and it's going to be directed at the patient. So it is something that oncologists worry about and physicists worry about. So in pencil beam, there is none of that. There's no physical compensator aperture, right? So you don't have to machine know those for each patient. You can change your treatment on the fly if you need to. There's more sparing of healthy tissues proximal to the target. You can have a larger treatment field. With Varian system, we have a 40 by 30 of the patient. And then obviously intensity and energy modulation possible, which gives you access to sort of advanced treatment plan techniques, which I won't go into. So now I've talked a little bit about how we deliver the dose, and I just want to maybe go over real quick, what a proton system looks like, a clinical proton system looks like. But to be honest, a lot of them look a lot like physics experiments under the hood, but high energy physics experiments. So, but really, so what I have pictured here is a Varian Linac with so you basically an electron source, a microwave Linac, and then this gets directed around this magnet into a target, and the Bremsstrahlung radiation comes out and goes through some beam shaping to conform to the tumor. So it's very simple, but really a proton system isn't all that much different. We have a source, which is basically just a plasma source, like a spark plug that goes out from time to time, and then the electric field extracts the protons from that and sends it into the accelerator. So for the accelerator, let's see, you guys know all this, but I have the animation, so I'll use it. So we all know how an accelerator works. We have this oscillating microwave field, which if you time it just right, it gives the proton bunch a pulse of acceleration as it goes down the Linac. So this, like I said, this is the standard for electrons, but electrons are much lighter and essentially relativistic in the first acceleration chamber. But protons, because they're much heavier, require a much longer drift space, and so to get up to treatment energies of say 250 MeV would require something like 80 meter long Linac. Although I think CERN has one which they're touting is only 37 meters long, but still that's not very compact. So what do we do? Well, you could shrink a linear accelerator by basically wrapping it. And again, this is the right way to be talking about cyclotrons, what is invented here. So the cyclotron, you basically take your alternating field and go between two what we call bees, and time that with and then you confine the charged particle to orbit with the magnetic field. And as it gains energy, its orbit will grow and grow and grow until you finally extract it. Another way of accelerating is a synchrotron. Synchrotrons, they're accelerated to constant velocity within the ring, and their steering magnets located along the path to keep the particles confined within the ring. And so the steering magnetic field strength is increased for higher energies. So all of these accelerators have pros and cons for proton therapy. So there are synchrotron systems out there, and the cyclotron system, that's by far the most popular. So cyclotrons are compact, they provide continuous beam, which is great for scanning. You can extract very high beam currents. They're robust, reliable, relatively inexpensive, and like I said, they're compatible with both types of scattering. However, one con is that they operate at a single energy. And it's not very easy to tune the cyclotron to various energy range. So it requires the use of a degrader, which I'll discuss in a little bit. A synchrotron, you can tune the energy, and they have great beam quality, but they're larger, they have a larger footprint, they're more expensive, they're a little bit more finicky. You know, to understand this, there's more downtime, which in a clinical setting is not good. They also have a pulse beam, which is not ideal for scanning, and the beam currents are typically lower. And then the Linac, like I said, there's no clinical system using the Linac, and it's just too big, and it's also pulse structure and so forth. But it also would have tunable energy. So like I said, at Varian we use a cyclotron, and most of the vendors do use cyclotrons. That requires the use of a degrader. So a degrader is essentially just a variable thickness material inserted in the proton beam to pull the bright beam back, slow down the protons. And, however, the disadvantage is it does a very good job at slowing the beam down, but at the cost of increasing the divergence. So coming out of the cyclotron, the emittance is only a few milliroadians, which is very small. And after the degrader, it can be up to 100 or 200 milliroadians. So it increases the phase space that it goes into by 2 orders of magnitude. So that results in low transmission efficiency, which and also increased secondary neutrons and so forth. So beam transport, we just use sort of standard vacuum pipes and quadrupole magnets to transport the beam from a cyclotron, the degrader here, down the beam line, and feed it into the various treatment rooms. So at each the treatment room, typically a lot of times there's an isosymmetric gantry, which means that keeps the patient in the middle and rotates the proton beam around, allowing access to all angles around the patient. And it's really most proton centers have at least one gantry. Here's just I'm going to go with there's a few Proton Vendors, actually quite a large number. This is at least as of, I think last year, the number of Proton centers in the US. The yellow, orange stars are in operation, and the white ones are in construction. It's under development here. This is just in the US, and there's several lot more worldwide. Vendors, Varian, IBA, Hitachi, Proton, which went bankrupt last year, Varian, Sumitomo, Mitsubishi, these are the big players. So Varian and IBA are really the top two in the proton part of it. In fact, just interesting fact, so IBA has historically, they've been doing protons for a very long time, and they've got 55% of the install base. But Varian entered protons in 2007 and sold our first system, clinical last year. And since then, in the last 2 years, we've had over half of the new rooms sold. So we're a latecomer, but fast to catch up. So why are we gaining ground so quickly? Well, like I said, the market is shifting almost entirely to scanning beam. And that's been our focus from the beginning. We never developed a passive scattering system. We always thought it's going to be scattering. The future is going to be a scanning beam. I guess we were right. So, and on top of that, we get a major investment, and Varian is a big name in radiation oncology. And customers feel comfortable having that established, feel comfortable with a stable and established company for such a large investment. So, really, our photon system truly is paving the way for our program. So, speaking of probing, I just want to go very quickly over our own system. Everything's made in Troisdorf, Germany. We bought in 2007. We got into proton therapy by buying XL Instruments, which was really, they did pretty much anything they had to do with superconducting magnets, including making this cyclotron, and so that was. And then we, since purchasing them, the first clinical system we built was the Scripps Proton Therapy Center down in San Diego, this is just a layout of it. It's a three gantries, 2 fixed beam rooms, cyclotron system. They have an imaging section over here, so the patients are loaded into these rooms, which just look like our regular exam rooms. Then they go across the hall and do proton therapy. So this is a picture of our cyclotron. Like I said, this is the beam light. It looks just like a high energy physics experiment. There's nothing, but this is all behind walls. The patient can't ever see this. It'd be kind of scary if they could. But we have a treatment range from 70 to 250 MeV and a beam current delivery 1 to 800 nanoamps, and that's to overcome some of that beam loss I was talking about due to the Degrader. The idea is to always maintain about 1 nanorun per the patient, which is about a grade. So, one of the things that we've done to make protons more commercially viable is gone to, we tried to make as many sub-assemblies as possible ahead of time. So these are like the, as you know, particle beams are best focused by quadruple pairs. So we pre-assemble our quadruple pairs in the factory and calibrate them, so when they get shipped to the customer site, they just get bolted into place, and that's the end of it. And that really helps shorten the install time. So this was just some pictures of the gantry. You can see there's me there, right there. What you're looking at is the face of this wheel here. So you see there's a person, the gantry is this whole thing up here. It is enormous, and when you're standing, this whole thing rotates around, and if you're in there and see it rotate, it's pretty impressive. It's enormous, and especially when it's 200 tons and it rotates at about 6 degrees a second, which when you see that massive amount of steel rotating that fast, it's very impressive. Inside the treatment room, however, you don't see any of that. It just looks like any other radiation oncology, radiation treatment room. Patients are positioned with the robotic couch. And the image guidance, we have 2 orthogonal X-ray imaging systems to do CBCT right before treatment, just for setup verification. And again, going back to your question, this would be the hope for adaptive therapy if we could bring the quality of this imaging system up to diagnostic quality and excellent. Obviously, there's some more effort into that. This is the control room. It's manned by 3 Varian staff full time, and there's a lot of screens up there, and those guys know what all I mean. I go down there. It just looks like a bunch of. It looks like a bunch of physics experiments to me, but it's completely transparent to the hospital staff. Though they just push a button. Here, this is what the hospital staff sees. Basically on off, moving the couch around. It's very simple. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes to really make this simple for the hospital staff. So that's kind of where we are with our current system and where proton therapy is. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about what are some of the hot topics that we care about. obviously the challenges in proton therapy are the size. The typical proton therapy center with the 1 million scripts, it's a $150 million system that takes up a football field. So that's not very affordable. It's not a very affordable model, especially for going worldwide. So bringing down the size and the cost is obviously very important to not just Varian, but the community as a whole. But also beam delivery precision, as you mentioned earlier, like you can't see the proton beam once it reaches the patient, it stops, and so there's some uncertainty there, and that's a topic of research. And then of course the neutron radiation, which I touched on. We want to minimize that and make sure that that the staff and the patients are safe and not receiving any extra radiation. So. In terms of reducing size and costs, our first effort is just to kind of, we have a single room system that we're developing. It's really just taking all of our existing components and putting them in the smallest footprint possible. This system would fit approximately the size of a tennis court, which is much less than a football field. And what we've done is we've tried to do it without making any critical compromises. So the quality of this beam would be the same quality as the big $150 multi-million system. So if you wanted to have proton therapy in your hospital basement, or you want to take up some parking lot spaces, you could do it with this system. So on the neutron side, that's been a project that I've been working on, and it's actually how I got to know John a little better, because I approached him. I'd heard he'd done neutron measurements before, but I ended up taking a slightly different direction. But for the approach I've taken is, so I've been using Monte Carlo, JF4, really to model all of the beamline optics, including the magnetic fields and the degrader and so forth, to get to sort of characterize the doubly differential spectrum and angle energy. And then I put that together with a CAD model of the building and use a radiation or Boltzmann transport program called Attila to get the dose everywhere in the room. I could use Monte Carlo for that, but it would take forever, and the statistics would basically, to get any reasonable statistics would take forever. So the Boltzmann transport really has the advantage of it's a deterministic solver, so it gets me the dose everywhere. I think this simulation took 6 to 8 hours. But of course, anytime you have a model, there's always a question. You want to validate that against something. So I bought a neutron detector, brought it down to strips, and did measurements at various locations. And what you're looking at here is both a 3-meter and a 4-meter arc about the degrader, and looking at the neutron dose measured versus simulation. You can see that our calculations are quite good, so we feel pretty good about this. So now this would then be an input into the building design and say, hey, well, look right here, we've got way too much wall. We can thin that down a little bit, and maybe like over here, you can see there's some dose leaking into the first treatment room. Maybe we want to beef up that wall, so something like that. That's how a building designer might use this information. So. Obviously, improving the degrader efficiency, and this really gets down to fundamental nuclear physics. I mean, we're just sending the proton beam through a block of graphite right now, and the divergence from that scattering process is necessitating, bigger cyclotron, more neutron shielding, because obviously the process of slowing down the protons generates neutrons. So we've looked into alternate materials, alternate structures, but any alternative way to change the beam energy coming out of that cyclotron down to treatment energies. Actually, a lossless way would be the best, but and yet maintaining the emittance, that's the gold standard. So if any of you guys have any bright ideas, you can call it Varian and probably some funding. So and then on the delivery side, this is actually John is very familiar. His PhD is working in this realm. So I mentioned earlier, we know where the proton stops pretty well, but there's a number of factors in the calculation that especially since we're calculating on X-ray CT, and an X-ray CT is basically just a voxelized volume of X-ray attenuation coefficients. Well, going from X-ray attenuation coefficient to proton stopping power is not straightforward, and there is an association, uncertainty associated with that. So, and that, as a result, there's a 3.5% error, 3.5% plus 2 millimeters. At every institution is slightly different, but on average, it's basically roughly 3.5 to 4.5% margin of error put on the treatment plan. So, what that means, what I'm showing down the picture here is in terms of, so this would be, in this lung case, if you add 3.5%, you're suddenly dosing this back wall versus just right here. And so there's some cases where that 3.5% matters more than others, but actually, what really the consequence of this 3.5% is that if there is a critical structure on the distal side of this beam, the oncologist will not point the beam at that critical structure. Rather, they will pass the beam along beside it and just use the lateral fall off of the beam because that's much more certain, much more known, and place that in a certain brag somewhere less harmful. So yeah, mitigation strategies. That's robust planning. That's one of those things. That's part of the robust planning part. But also, just in terms of reducing the uncertainty of that ranking, there's you can use instead of just a single energy CT, you can use dual energy, and then there's prompt gamma imaging, which is John's project. So dual energy CT, the way that we go from Hounsfield units to proton stopping power analysis is a calibration curve that looks much like this. In fact, I think this might even be a clinical calibration curve. But the idea is, an X-ray, a single X-ray CT only gives you atomic density, electron density information. But if you can combine two CTs from two different energies, you can actually get the effective atomic number, and that will reduce the conversion uncertainty. And there are published predictions that say you could reduce it by up to 1.5 or 2%. So the 3% becomes 1.5 or 2%. So that would be clinically significant. Prompt gamma, I don't have John's solution up here, but I do have. So there's basically what the prompt gamma idea is that the proton induces nuclear reactions that emit gammas, signature or prompt gammas. If you can measure the prompt gammas, you can. There's a high correlation between the prompt gamma emission and the distal edge of the dark peak. So if you can image the prompt gammas, you can sort of pinpoint where the bright peak is coming from. So current approaches, actually, there's a commercially available solution which essentially just uses a knife edge slit and an array of simulators and creates a measured profile like this. And by characterizing that ahead of time with Monte Carlo, you can figure out shifts in the bright peak. And that's the approach that they use. Another one comes from astrophysics using quantum camera. Jury's out on whether or not that's going to work clinically, but if you guys are interested, John has a really interesting solution to this problem too. Actually, very promising. So, but it's another sort of clever implementation of this approach. So. And obviously we don't have any active prompt gamma research going on, but we're talking to various clinical partners and investigators who are looking into this to see what might be the best, most commercially viable solution moving forward. So hopefully I've given you a flavor of sort of the advances that have been made in radiation oncology. in the last decade, and it's really been sort of exponential, like most things, since the computer age. And really more and more radiation is being used as a curative treatment rather than just for disease management. But I just wanted to leave you with a couple of developments where I think the field is going that I think are very, very promising. And the first has to do with, so protons, I've really focused on the conformal dose distribution as the main benefit of protons. But there's been some research that shows that, at the cellular and molecular level, there may be benefits to protons other than just the dose, and it really is tied to what they call the relative biological effectiveness. And up till now, the RD of protons has been regarded as something like 1.1 or 1.2, but there's a body of research out there showing that that's maybe too simple. That if you look at the LET, that the RB might actually be tied to the LET, and the LET is tied to the distillation Bragg peak, and so you might get different, more preferential cell killing due to the LET, but not just cell killing, but there are also these chain differences in the molecular cellular tissue levels that really lead closer investigation, and these advantages are even amplified when you look at carbon therapy. I mentioned that at the very beginning. Carbon therapy is not very widespread, but basically there's some distinct advantages of carbon. Namely, there's, first of all, just on the dose side, there's a sharper Bragg peak. And then on top of that, the multiple Coulomb scattering is less, so you get the carbon ions travel much straighter lines, so you get better dose conformality. But you also have much higher LET, and it seems like there's a lot of studies in Japan that are showing remarkable disease control and survival results with carbon. So it's definitely, I think, an exciting development in radiation therapy. But there's always a but. Carbon, it's 12 times more massive, which means that the accelerating structures need to be not only the accelerating structure, but the gantry 12 times, also 12 times larger, more massive, and more costly. Just showing here at a high-NAC facility in Japan, it's a synchrotron. I'm not sure if a carbon cyclotron would even be feasible, but so they use a synchrotron accelerator and these huge superconducting gantries. But in addition to that, all the uncertainties that I mentioned about proton targeting are amplified for carbon. So that's another issue. I think we need to get the carbon for the proton targeting under control before we think about carbon. So basically, there's a lot of innovation yet to be made to really make carbon smaller, cheaper, and more accessible. But there's a lot of promise if we do crack that market. And then diverging a little bit from physics, but also important for radiation. Is there's a lot of growing body of research showing that actually radiation is inducing inflammatory cell death and activation of antigens to trigger an immune response to certain tumors. And so initial clinical trials are actually very promising at showing sort of a systemic response to the cancer by the immune system, triggered by by the radiation killing as well, releasing the antigens, presenting us to the T cells and so forth. So I also think that this is an exciting space and definitely worth watching. So with that, I appreciate your attention and open this up for questions.
Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So to date, has it just been the size and cost of these accelerators and protons of the radiation therapy world?
Yeah, it is. Cost is a big issue because it's also a little bit politics. The insurance companies, the payers, the Medicare, they don't want to pay the cost. They want to pay the same for protons as they do for radiation therapy, because they say, well, I mean, it should prove that it's better. Right? I mean, it's the whole move toward value-based medicine versus it used to be enough just to show, hey, this works, and there's no toxicity to the patient. Well, now they're saying, well, prove that it works better.
So in places where this is used, presumably they do outcome analysis and you'll be able to say what the...
Right. I mean, the problem is that it takes like a phase 3 clinical trial, and those take, where you're doing, comparing IMR2 versus protons, and then you got to look at 10, 15-year outcomes, and that's the sort of thing that they're asking for now. And it's actually a very interesting topic because, I mean, the whole field, I mean, a lot of radiation oncology sort of feels like, okay, this is the right thing to do. How can we be more creative to convince the payers that this is worthwhile? Because the payers obviously don't want to pay for it. But it's an interesting dynamic. But yeah, obviously, if you drive the cost of the treatment center down, then it becomes a non-issue. Then it's like, okay, well, we'll just treat this protons because they're better.
What was the difference between true beam and real beam?
Oh, sorry, true beam is our photon system. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Real beam is the photon system.
Maybe you can comment on because pencil beam, some of us might imagine that it's really like millimeter beam. Because I mean, it's limited by the physics of striking and all of that. So your higher resolution pencil beam, maybe you can comment on what kind of the extension of the beams you're normally talking about. So you talk about fall off about millimeter, but the extension of the beam can be much larger.
I mean, the
divergence.
Yeah. So I mean, our initial beam size is it's like 4 millimeter 1 sigma calcium. So it's not tiny, right? But yeah, I mean, you're right. Once you get down 10 centimeters in the patient, it can it's easily twice that or more. So I think that's part of the reason why we haven't put a lot of emphasis. We've emphasized transmission efficiency over beam size. But for shallow tumors and high, we do try to be as small as possible.
How hard is the optimization problem to do inverse science planning?
How hard is it?
Like, how is it done right now? There's a lot of research in minority planning or breaking but
Yeah, I'm not an expert in the optimizing algorithms, but I know that one of the latest developments in therapy is multi-criterion optimization, and then obviously the more criteria include, the more solutions there are. And so I think the most important thing is really not getting too far away from the physician's intent. I mean, the physician, the oncologist knows where the dose needs to go and where it needs not to go, as long as the optimizer, and as long as you have clear criteria for that. I think that's the key. But yeah, it is a. If you go to any of these conferences, I mean, there are whole sessions on optimization and things like that, time optimization. Yeah, robustness is a big thing.
All right, let's thank our speaker one more time. All right.